was standing in line at the grocery store when my card declined. Not once. Twice. The cashier lowered her voice and asked if I had another form of payment. I paid with cash and walked out into the cold, already knowing this wasn't a mistake. An hour later, my son called. His voice was careful, rehearsed. He said they'd made a decision that morning. For my safety. He said Lauren had read some articles. He said it was better this way. He didn't ask me. He didn't apologize. That night, I checked my phone records. Then my bank alerts. Then my email. The pattern was there. Dates. Times. Authorizations I never gave. 3 days later, at Christmas dinner, Lauren stood up, smiling, and told the room she was taking control of everything. People nodded. Someone laughed. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. I set my glass down and stood. Daniel, I said quietly. You really don't know, do you? The room went still. After Christmas dinner, the house slowly returned to noise. Plates were cleared. Someone turned the television back on. Conversations restarted as if nothing had happened. Only I knew something had already ended. Lauren had seated me at the far end of the table. From there, you can see everyone, but no one has to include you. That kind of placement is never accidental. It's control, delivered politely. When I stood and said, "You really don't know," the silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was assessment. People were waiting to see how I would behave. When I sat back down, they assumed the moment had passed. That I had accepted it. They mistook restraint for surrender. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I turned on the desk lamp in my living room and did what I've done my entire life when something feels wrong. I documented. I started with my bank statements. Not just the most recent ones. The last 12 months. Patterns don't lie. Grocery spending stayed consistent. Utilities were unchanged. Then suddenly, credit activity dropped to 0. That isn't a decision someone forgets to make. That's an action taken by someone else. Next, I searched my email archive. Daniel's name. Lauren's name. The bank's domain. I found the message. 3 weeks old. The subject line was harmless. Protective financial action. Inside was an article about senior fraud. The language was careful. The request was framed as concern. An authorized contact box had been checked. The authorized contact was not me. I checked the timestamp. Tuesday morning, 9:14 a.m. I remembered exactly where I was. A warehouse on the east side, repairing a conveyor belt for a tenant I'd leased space to for years. I signed the invoice at 9:22. That detail mattered. It meant I hadn't approved anything. I checked my call logs. Daniel had called at 10:03 a.m. That was the call where he said, "We decided." The timeline aligned too perfectly to be accidental. I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation turns evidence into emotion. I let things continue. Over the next few days, Lauren sent follow-up emails to the bank thanking them for acting quickly. Daniel forwarded me articles about planning at your age. I saved everything. Printed it. Labeled it with dates. I called the bank once. I didn't argue. I asked procedural questions. The clerk spoke gently, like someone protecting me from myself. I asked who initiated the request. She told me. I asked what documentation was used. She listed it. I asked for the internal account notes. There was a pause. Her tone changed. She said she would need to escalate the request. That was the first shift. I wrote down the time and the name. Then I called Edward Collins. My attorney. 15 years. He doesn't rush and he doesn't guess. I gave him dates. Documents. No opinions. When I finished, he said one thing. Good. You didn't sign anything. That keeps this clean. Letters went out. Not accusations. Questions. To the bank. To Daniel. To Lauren, copied to Daniel. Calm language. Precise requests. Lauren replied first. Long emails. Emotional framing. Heavy use of we. Daniel replied later. Short. Apologetic. Confused. The bank replied last. And their tone had completely changed. They acknowledged improper authorization. An internal compliance review. A reversal already in progress. That was when the system noticed me. I didn't tell anyone. I let Christmas arrive as planned. When Lauren stood that night and announced she was taking control, she believed the room supported her. She believed my silence meant weakness. She didn't realize the systems had already moved. And I was done explaining anything. The days after Christmas passed with an unnatural calm. Not peace. Avoidance. The kind people rely on when they hope something uncomfortable will fade if no one names it. Daniel didn't call. Lauren sent one short message. Hope you're feeling better. As if this had been an illness, not a decision made without me. I didn't respond. 3 days later, the bank's first written reply arrived. The language was neutral, but the structure had shifted. We are reviewing the authorization request under internal compliance standards. That sentence matters. It means someone inside the system has noticed a deviation. Edward told me not to speak on the phone anymore. Everything in writing. Conversations are flexible. Records are not. I didn't change my routine. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I kept appointments. That steadiness unsettles people more than anger ever does. Daniel finally called. His voice was different. Less certain. Mom, Lauren's really stressed, he said. She thinks this got blown out of proportion. I listened. When he stopped talking, I asked one question. What did the bank tell you? He didn't answer right away. That silence told me enough. Later that afternoon, Lauren emailed Edward directly, copying Daniel. It was the first time she addressed the issue formally. Her tone had shifted. Where she once assumed authority, she was now explaining herself. Explanation is what people do when confidence cracks. She wrote about concern. About family. About protection. She said no boundaries had been crossed. Edward replied with 4 sentences. Dates. The authorization language used. A reference to capacity law. Then one question. Please identify the statutory authority under which this action was taken. Lauren didn't reply. 2 days later, the bank sent a final notice. My credit access was fully restored. The authorized contact was removed. The account notes were corrected. An internal corrective action was recorded. No apology. Institutions don't apologize. They adjust. I printed the notice and placed it in the file. That evening, Daniel came to my door without warning. He stood there longer than necessary before knocking, like someone waiting to be told whether they were welcome. I didn't know it would go this far, he said. I looked at him and said the only thing that mattered. You never asked. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He just nodded, slowly, as if something had finally come into focus. That was when I understood the shift had already happened. Lauren believed control came from initiative. She hadn't realized authority comes from permission. And she never had mine. Lauren changed tactics once silence stopped working. She stopped emailing Edward. She stopped copying Daniel. Instead, she went around both of us. A notice arrived from a financial planning office I had never contacted. It thanked me for my interest and confirmed an upcoming consultation. I recognized the phrasing immediately. Someone had tried to initiate oversight without authority, hoping momentum would replace consent. I canceled the appointment in writing and asked how my information had been obtained. The reply came an hour later, brief and careful. They had been contacted by a third party who claimed to have family authorization. They apologized and closed the file. That was the second system that corrected itself once paperwork was requested. Edward advised me to request a formal fraud review, not because money was missing, but because access had been assumed. That distinction matters. Theft is loud. Misuse hides behind concern. The request triggered another tone change. A senior compliance officer called me directly. She didn't explain. She asked questions. Precise ones. Did I grant authority? Had I signed anything? Did I understand the implications of guardianship requests? When I said no to all of it, she paused. Then she said, "Thank you for clarifying." Not sympathy. Recognition. Within a week, written confirmations arrived. No current or pending authority existed. Any future request would require my presence, my signature, and independent verification. Flags were placed on my accounts. Not warnings. Protections. Daniel didn't call during this time. Lauren did. She left a voicemail this time, not an email. Voices are harder to deny later, but people forget that recordings exist. Her message was urgent, controlled, irritated. She said I was overreacting. She said this was creating stress during her pregnancy. She said I was forcing Daniel to choose. I saved it. The shift became visible after that. Family members stopped repeating her language. Invitations slowed. Conversations changed shape. Control loses credibility when it meets process. I hadn't confronted anyone. I hadn't demanded anything. I had simply stopped being manageable. And systems respond quickly when that happens. After that, things didn't explode. They thinned out. Lauren stopped calling. When she did speak, it was through Daniel, and only about logistics. Appointments. Mail. Schedules. The language of control had disappeared. What remained was administration. Daniel began coming by alone. At first, he talked too much. He explained. He apologized in fragments. I didn't interrupt. Eventually, he stopped filling the space and started listening. That was new. I didn't understand how fast it happened, he said one afternoon. It felt responsible. Everyone agreed. I nodded. Agreement is easy when the cost belongs to someone else. The bank sent one final letter confirming the closure of the review. My accounts were flagged for direct holder verification. No third-party requests would be processed without my presence. Copies were sent to Edward and archived. I filed everything. Then I stopped checking. Lauren attempted mediation once, through a counselor recommended by her family. Edward declined on my behalf. Capacity wasn't the issue. Consent was. There was nothing to mediate. When my grandson was born, I visited quietly. I brought no advice. No money. Just time. I made it clear what I would and would not do. Support would be transparent. Conditional on respect. Never silent again. Lauren was polite. Careful. Her confidence had recalibrated. Daniel changed slowly. He began handling his own finances again. He asked questions instead of repeating statements. He stopped asking me to smooth things over. I restructured my estate the following spring. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Everything documented. Everything intentional. No room for assumption. Life returned to its usual shape. Work. Maintenance. Small routines. The kind that don't announce themselves. I didn't win anything. I kept what was already mine. Silence didn't disappear from my life. It became mine again. And that made all the difference.